We are from DIV6 and today we will be presenting about technology software. Our group members are Yasmin Suraya binti Muhammad Yusuf, Zulaika binti Zulkifli, Nur Damira binti Lukmanti, Anis Arina binti Azhari, and Nur Zahia binti Muhammad Zaki. The company we have chosen for this topic is Iris and HCL. The background for Iris is that Iris is a corporation Berhad, is a technology innovator and leading provider of solutions and advancements for trusted identification. As the inventor of the world's first e-passport and the first multi-application e-ID card, Iris has more than 18 years of experience in trusted identification. Iris endeavors to be the global leader and preferred provider in design, development, and manufacturing of secure electronic identification documents. For HCL, HCL was one of the first IT and software companies in Malaysia to achieve the coveted MSC status, a designation awarded by the Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation, or known as MDEC, to participants in the country's ICT initiatives. HCL is also focused around software services for businesses. It offers applications integration services, infrastructure management services, digital and analytics services, cybersecurity, and software for Internet of the Things technology.
First, current ratio. An efficient management of working capital will require a current ratio between 1.5 to 2.0. In this graph, it shows that for the first year, this company did manage to reach 1.22, which was just enough to cover off its debts. In the 2 year, the company showed an amazing performance in the 2 year by reaching a total 1.74 in current ratio, but unfortunately dropped by 0.61 tick in the 3rd year. In the 4th year, this company also showed a poor performance by dropping its current ratio to 0.81, which means that the company doesn't have enough liquid assets to cover its short-term liabilities. Second, quick ratio. The quick ratio in this graph shows that the company managed to have enough quick assets to pay for its current liabilities for the first 3 years, but dropped in the 4 years to 0.74, but the company managed to rise by 0.33 the year after. Third, cash ratio. A ratio above 1 means that a company is able to pay off its current liabilities with cash and cash equivalents, which least have some funds left over. In this graph, we can see that over the 5 years, not only was the company able to pay off its current liabilities, the cash ratio had even gotten worse over the years, especially in the year 2017 and 2018.
Firstly, debt to equity ratio. The average ideal debt to equity ratio would be 1 to 1.5, but this varies up to the industry as mentioned earlier. This does mean that the lower the debt to equity ratio, the lower the risk. In this graph, it shows that the industry IRIS did not once achieve a ratio above 2 or a high debt to equity ratio, which means that throughout the first 2 years, IRIS had a low risk of financing its growth with debt, but the ratio increased by 1.05 the next year. The ratio increased again in the year 2018 by 0.6. The company managed to lower the ratio in 2019 by 1.54, which means that in the year 2019, the company achieved to finance its growth without debt. Next, debt to total capital. In this graph, it shows that this industry uses little of its financial leverage and has a low risk because throughout the 5 years, the debt to equity ratio was all under 1. This shows that the proportion of debt a company uses to finance its operations as compared with its capital is very low. Next, time interest earned. Time interest earned is a solvency that shows the ability of the company income that can be used to cover interest expenses in the future and to continue to service its debt. A high ratio, usually above 2, means that a company is able to meet its interest obligations because earnings are significantly greater than annual interest obligations. In this graph, it shows that throughout the 5 years, the time interest earn ratio is over, which means that the company presents less of a risk to investors and creditors in terms of solvency, and it is considered as an acceptable risk.
We know that a good margin will vary considerably by industry, but in general, a 10% net profit margin is considered average, a 20% margin is considered high, and a 5% margin is low or bad. In this graph, it shows that in the first 2 years, the company Iris was doing very well by achieving percentage above 20. Though it showed a great performance in the year 2015 and 2016. In the year 2017, it dropped dramatically all the way to 5.8, which could indicate that this company is underpricing. Iris managed to increase its gross profit margin percentage by 2.3% in the year 2018, but the percentage was still below its average, which was 10%. In 2019, Iris has shown an even better performance by increasing the percentage all the way to 22.7%, which is the second highest percentage throughout those 5 years. This shows that although the percentage fell dramatically in the year 2017 and 2018, Iris still managed to do well in the year after. In this paragraph, it shows that in the first 2 years, the operating profit margin is only 6.9% and 6.4%, which means that it is under the average percentage for a good operating profit margin. In the third year, Iris operating profit margin increased to 11.7%, which is good and high. We know this because margins above the industry average, which is 10% and above, or the overall market, indicate financial efficiency and stability. Though it didn't last very long because in the year 2018, Iris operating profit margin decreased to 8.1%, which is below average. Iris stepped up its company and managed to increase its margin all the way to 23.5%, which means that in that certain year, the company is being well managed and is potentially less of a risk compared to those company that has a lower percentage. Iris has shown a negative net profit margin throughout 4 out of the 5 years shown in the graph. A low net profit margin means that a company uses an ineffective cost structure or has a poor pricing strategies. Therefore, a low ratio can result from an inefficient management, which would lead to a high cost. Though in the 5 years, Iris has managed to increase its net profit margin to 16.4%, which means that its profit is 0.16 for each dollar of sales generated. Throughout the first 4 years, the company Iris shows negative return on asset. A low percentage return on asset indicates that this company is not making enough income from the use of its assets. The machinery may not be increasing production efficiency or lowering overall production costs enough to positively impact the company's profit margin. Though in the 5th year, which was in 2019, Iris return on assets increased to 7.3%, which is generally considered good. In this graph, it shows that the return on equity declined and showed a negative percentage throughout the first 4 years. Declining return on equity suggests the company is becoming less efficient at creating profits and increasing shareholder values.
For banks to cover their cost of capital, return on equity level should be closer to 10%, as shown in the graph. On the fifth year, the return on equity increased to 13.8%. Historically speaking, a ratio of 1% or greater has been considered pretty good, but this ratio will fluctuate with the prevailing economic times.
First, current ratio. HCL has shown an efficient management of working capital throughout the 5 years by reaching a current ratio above 1. HCL has achieved an amazing result, making all the current ratio above 2, and in 2016 it even reached 3.8, which is more than enough liquid asset to cover its short-term liabilities. HCL did not show a poor performance throughout the 5 years. Second, quick ratio. The quick ratio in this graph shows that the company managed to pay for its current liability finally by achieving and keeping its quick ratio above 1 throughout the 5 years. For the first 4 years, the company managed to stay above 3, but in the 5th year, it dropped to 2.4, but it's still a good ratio and still managed to achieve enough quick asset to pay for its current liabilities. Third, cash ratio. The cash ratio for HCL has shown a positive result in the early stage, but has dropped dramatically to 0.21 by 1.76 in the year 2017. Although the company managed to increase its cash ratio in the next 2 years, the ratio still did not reach above 1, which is the amount whereby the company will be able to pay off its current liability with cash and cash equivalents.
Firstly, debt to equity ratio. The ideal debt to equity ratio will vary depending on the industry because some industries use more debt than others. Financial and manufacturing industries often have higher ratios that can be greater than 2. Often, industries that have a higher debt to equity ratio will mean that the industry has a higher risk to finance its growth with debt. The average ideal debt to equity ratio would be 1 to 1.5, but this varies up to the industry as mentioned earlier. This does mean that the lower the debt to equity ratio, the lower the risk. It is important for most industries to not achieve a debt to equity ratio above 2. In this graph, it shows that the industry HCL did not once achieve a ratio above 2 or a high debt to equity ratio, which means that throughout the 5 years, it had a low risk of financing its growth with debt. Next, debt to total capital. The debt to total capital can also relate to the debt to equity ratio, whereby the higher the solvency, the higher the risk of these industries' use of financial leverage. The debt to total capital ratio shows the proportion of debt a company uses to finance its operations as compared with its capital. In this graph, it shows that this industry uses little of its financial leverage and has a lower risk because throughout the 5 years, the ratios were all less than 1. Next, time interest earned. Time interest earned is a solvency that shows the ability of the company income that can be used to cover interest expenses in the future and to continue to service its debt. A high ratio, usually above 2, means that a company is able to meet its interest obligations because earnings are significantly greater than annual interest obligations. In this graph, it shows that throughout the 5 years, the time interest earn ratio is over 4.0, which means that the company presents less of a risk to investors and creditors in terms of solvency, and it is considered as an acceptable risk.
The gross profit margin is a profitability measure that shows the percentage of gross profit in comparison to sales. In other words, it calculates the ratio of profit left of sales after deducting cost of sales. A good margin will vary considerably by industry, but as a general rule of thumb, a 10% net profit margin is considered average, a 20% margin is considered high or good, and a 5% margin is low. In this graph, the percentage of the gross profit margin for the first 3 years are above average. For the year 2018, HCL has shown a great work in achieving gross profit margin percentage of 24.7%, whilst in the year 2019 it dropped by 5.4 but still managed to maintain a percentage above average. HCL is a company that can make a reasonable profit on sales as long as it keeps overhead costs in control. The operating profit margin ratio indicates how much profit a company makes after paying for variable costs of production, such as wages, raw materials, and others. It is also expressed as a percentage of sales and then shows the efficiency of a company controlling the costs and expense associated with business operations. Based on this paragraph, it shows that for the first 3 years, the operating profit margin is above average, which is good. In the fourth year, the operating margin has dropped to 7.4%, which is not as bad because a low and a bad operating profit margin is 5% and under. In the year 2019, HCL's operating profit margin increased to 14.6%. Rising operating margin shows that this company is managing its costs and increasing its profits. HCL has shown an amazing achievement throughout the 5 years whereby not once did they get lower than 60.7%. This shows that this company managed to achieve a higher net profit margin, which means this company is more efficient at converting sales into actual profit. Throughout the 5 years, HCL has shown a positive return on assets. A positive return on asset ratio usually indicates an upward profit trend as well. The return on assets ratio measures how effectively a company can earn a return on its investment in assets. In other words, return on assets show how efficiently a company can convert the money used to purchase assets into net income or profit. Return on equity is a measure of management ability to generate income from the equity available to it. Return on equity of 15 to 20% are generally considered good. Return on equity is also a factor in stock valuation in association with other financial ratios. Throughout the 5 years, HCL has managed to achieve a high return on equity, which shows that it is a good thing if net income is extremely large compared to equity because a company's performance is so strong.
So, the conclusion is, in a nutshell, between the company Iris and HCL, HCL has shown a more positive impact on its financial than Iris. Sources of finance is available from a variety of sources and in many ways, but each source has its own costs and benefits. It is therefore important that the company Iris chooses an appropriate and cheap source of finance for the smooth operation of the firms. There are many important factors when it comes to choosing a source of finance. However, for the company Iris, further work needs to be done to fix its problems. It is sometimes necessary for a company like Iris to standardize their published financial statement to ensure that they are comparable with other companies such as HCL over time. So, that's all from us. Thank you.